Hello. So today we're just gonna go through where we at in the economic cycle, in the long-term debt cycle that we've discussed before, and where we're probably going. Okay. So I think the facts are this day in time. So we're talking about June 2022. One, prices are rising because more quantity of goods and services are being sold, and to the way that the central banks fought inflation was by taking money and credit away from people and companies to reduce their spending. So those two factors are contributing massively towards inflation. And when you put together with, reducing supply of things like wheat from Ukraine and oil from Russia and Shanghai COVID lockdowns in China, all of that are contributing toward reduction of supply, right? So I won't get too much into the further details, but if you ever study about economics, supply and demand are really important. Also, interest rates and the price of money are very important KPIs, right? So while tightening reduces inflation, which is where the central banks are now trying to do. So before they were cutting interest rates. When you cut interest rates, you stimulate the economy because everything gets cheaper. Like loans from the banks get cheaper. When you raise interest rates, it's the opposite effect. So things get more expensive. Okay, so to get money away from the bank is now more expensive. To get a mortgage is now more expensive. So therefore, people spend less on personal consumption. Therefore, it tames inflation. Inflation goes down. So it's all a cause and effect in economics. Economics is like a machine. So when something happens, there's be a cause, there's going to be an effect and a consequence. Okay. So what they are doing right now is they are doing the tightening, right? So they were in quantitative easing before, now they're in quantitative tightening, which reduces inflation because it results in people spending less. So it doesn't make things better because it takes power away, right? So it shifts some of the squeezing of people via inflation to squeezing them via giving them less buying power. Okay, so it's a balancing act that they play. Either right now they have inflation or they give people less buying power. So the only way to raise living standards over the long term is to raise productivity. And central banks don't raise productivity. What raise productivity is technology, is better ways of doing things. Okay. So what do central banks do? So central banks, they move demand around by providing and withdrawing spending power by influencing the creation and amounts of debt assets and debt liabilities. So they do that in a way that naturally produces cycles in markets, so bull and bear markets, and economies that is called expansions and recessions. Okay, so they try to produce the short-term debt cycles. This is also known as business cycle. So the simulations of debts in central banks produce typically they add over time, right, to produce more ups and downs until the debt assets and liabilities they get unsustainably large. At what point they have no other alternative other than trying a beautiful deleveraging. What is a beautiful deleveraging is when they try to tame inflation, but without actually busting the economy. Okay, so and that is what we are experiencing right now. Okay, so whenever the decline of interest rates they hit zero, and then central bank starts printing, and a lot of debt has been created, we get into a position where we stimulate the economy to the max. And if that creates inflation, then you need to go on the other way around. But most fundamentally, one person's debts are another person's assets, and one person's spending is another person's income. So what means is when there are a lot of debt liabilities and debt assets outstanding, it becomes impossible to make things good for both debtors and creditors. And what is the Fed trying to do right now? the Fed is moving away from printing and buying debt at an annual rate of $1.5 trillion to selling it at an annual rate of $1.1 trillion. So they were buying 1.5 trillion, buying assets. How do they buy assets? They print money. That creates inflation. Now they were buying $1.5 trillion on an annual basis. Now they are selling 1.1 trillion at an annual basis, so year-on economy. So if the holders of that don't get adequate returns, they will sell then, which worsens the free market debt supply demand picture, which either leads to a dramatic cutback in private equity, which is depression, or central bank creating more money and buy more debt to fill in the funding role, which is inflationary. So in summary, my points are that one, there isn't anything that the Fed can do to fight inflation without creating economic weakness. And two, with debt assets and liabilities as high as they are right now, and the Fed are also selling government debt, it's likely that private credit growth will have to contract, weakening the economy. And then three, over the long run, the Fed will most likely chart a middle course that will take the form of stagflation. So that's why, because the points 1 and 2, so Fed cannot fight inflation without economic weakness. 2, it's very likely that private credit growth will have to contract, weakening the economy. Then therefore, 3 is likely to be true, which is the middle course is some form of stagflation. For those of you who don't know what stagflation is, it's basically stagnating with inflation. So very low economic growth with a good amount of inflation, So then in terms of what to do about it, always look for what are assets that perform relatively well during inflation. Those are basically inflation linked bonds, cash, stocks that people must consume their products in order to survive, like Costco wholesale, Walmart, Nestle, Mondelez. So, oil. So those necessities, right? Also, traditionally, gold's being very used. Crypto is a question mark because we haven't really seen crypto performing in a crisis as bad as 2008 because it was created in 2009, right? Bitcoin. So crypto is a question mark, but some people kind of enjoy. So again, it always brings back to the most important point in investing. The most important point in investing is diversification. Have at least 10 to 15 uncorrelated assets that you can bet over the long run. And that's all for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this.